Hey friends, it's so good to see you today. Thank you so much for coming to hear your Easter lesson. Happy Easter, it's here. Oh my goodness, it's so crazy. So last week we started our Easter lesson on Palm Sunday. We were talking about how Jesus rode into Jerusalem on his donkey and went to the temple, and we talked about how people were really happy to see him because they thought that he was this warrior that was coming to save them from the Romans. And we also talked about how the Romans were not happy about that, and they didn't like that Jesus was there. So we talked about Palm Sunday last week, and this week we are at Easter, so we're going to continue with that. So to kind of pick up from there, as we said, the Romans were not very happy that Jesus was there, and so they were trying to find a reason to get him in trouble and get him thrown into prison and try to get rid of him. They didn't want this king coming to save the people, right? They had all the people under their control, and they didn't want any of that to change. And they thought, what the other people thought, Jesus was there to try to destroy them. And we know that's not why he was there at all. So they kept trying to get Jesus in trouble. They were spying on him, trying to catch him doing something wrong, and he never did anything wrong. So that was really hard for them to try to do that. So anyway, they had all these people watching him and just couldn't catch him at anything. So this one night, Jesus decided to sit down with all of his disciples and have supper with them. This is what would be the last supper that he would have with his disciples or his friends that had been following him around for the past few years, and he was teaching them. And so they sat down to have supper, and Jesus wanted to give them one final lesson before he left them, because he knew that his time was coming. And he would have to leave them soon. So he wanted to make sure to give them one final lesson. And so he went and he got a bowl of water and some cloth, and he went to each and every one of them and started washing their feet. And that's a big deal, because back then, washing feet was something that only a servant would do. So the disciples were, no, you can't do that. We should be doing that for you. You can't wash our feet. We serve you, you don't serve us. And Jesus wanted to give them this one last lesson. I'm a servant for you. Meaning we're all the same. We're all servants. We all have to love one another, and we all have to take care of each other. So he wanted to give them that one final lesson. So he continued to wash their feet. When he was finished, they all sat down and they had their final supper together. And Jesus broke the bread and he passed it around, and he said, "Take this and remember me. This will be like my body. Every time you eat this bread, you'll remember me." So they passed it around. They each took a bite of bread, and then he poured some wine, and he said, "Take this wine," and the color of it was red. He said, "Take this wine and drink that, and this is going to be like my blood. Always remember me and the things that I've done." So they took it and they passed it around, and he told them, "I'm about to leave you. These things are about to happen, but don't worry, I'll be back." And the disciples couldn't believe it. What? No, you can't leave us. You can't do that. There's no way. We won't let them take you. And Jesus told them it would be okay and he would be back. So he had his final supper with them, and then they all left and they went up to the Mount of Gethsemane, and that's going to actually be where we open our Bibles and we start kind of talking about everything that happened with Good Friday and Easter. So you're going to turn to John 18. That's in the New Testament. So it's the Gospel of John 18, and we're going to start from there. So they went up to this mountain called Gethsemane. That's a really weird word. Try to say that, Gethsemane. And they went up there, and Jesus told all of his disciples, he said, okay, guys, you need to stay awake and keep watch, because he knew that there were going to be soldiers after him to try to come get him. He said, just keep watch, and I'm going to go pray. And so he said, okay. So Jesus left and he went to go pray, and he knew that his time was coming of what he was about to go through. And he knelt and he prayed to God and his Father, and he told him, if there's any other way for this to be done, then please let it be so. But if there's not, then I'll do it, and your will be done. So, and Jesus got up and he went back down, and he saw all of his disciples had fallen asleep. They were asleep. So he woke them all up. He said, no, you guys, wake up. So they woke up, and right about then, these soldiers come, and wouldn't you know it, one of the disciples, one of Jesus's friends, Judas, had led them to where he was. See, the Romans had taken Judas aside and paid him some money, and told him, you can have this money if you show us where Jesus is. So Judas told them where to find Jesus, and he told him, I'm gonna kiss the one that's Jesus, and you'll know that that's him. So he let him in, and Judas went up to Jesus and gave him a kiss on his cheek. And the soldiers went to go grab Jesus and take him away. And the disciples were, no, you can't take him. You can't take Jesus. And Peter drew his sword, and he went after one of the soldiers, and he swung his sword, and he actually cut one of the ears off. Oh! And the soldier was, oh no! Oh, my ear! He cut my ear off. And Jesus said, everybody just calm down. And he went up and he said, Peter, put your sword down. And he went up to the soldier, and he placed his hand over his ear, and he healed his ear. The soldier couldn't believe it. I'm healed. He gave me my ear back. It's amazing. Even then, even when he was being taken away, even then he was healing. So the soldiers continued to take Jesus and chained him up and put him in jail, and they did not do very nice things to him. They hurt him, they beat him, and it was just a terrible time. So the soldiers took Jesus to a man named Pilate, and he was governor over the Romans, and he was the one that would sentence the prisoners, whether he would make the decision to let them go or if they needed to die, or depending on what they did wrong. So they took Jesus to Pilate to have him, tell him what we need to do. So after Pilate was talking with Jesus, he said, this man hasn't done anything wrong. I don't know why he's even here. So he took, the only thing that he could think to do was he took him out in front of the crowd of people, and he put Jesus on this side, and he put a man named Barabbas on this side. And Barabbas was in jail. He had actually killed some people, and he was not a very good guy. And so he put Barabbas up there, and he put Jesus up there, and he said, this Jesus has done nothing wrong. I don't know why he's even here. But they're saying he's not good. And so here he is, and here's Barabbas. He's killed people. I will let one of them go. Who do you want me to let go? And the crowd started screaming, Barabbas, let Barabbas go. Let us have Barabbas. And Pilate was, what? Okay, well, what do you want me to do with Jesus? And the crowd started screaming, crucify him, crucify him. And he said, crucify him? What? let him go because he hasn't done anything. And then the crowd got really angry. And they said, no, crucify him, crucify him. And they started to get really, really upset and just go crazy. So Pilate, to calm them down, he said, okay, but this is not my decision. This is completely your decision. And we'll crucify him and we'll let Barabbas go. So that's what they did. So Jesus was taken away, and he was beaten more, and they put a crown of thorns on his head. Thorns that were sticking in his head that hurt, right? And they put a crown of thorns on his head because, people were calling him the King of the Jews. He was supposed to be this big king. So they gave him a crown of thorns to represent being their king. So they did that, and then they got this big cross, and they put it over his shoulder, and he had to carry it up the mountain. Oh, that was a big, 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 heavy cross, and it was really, really, really hard, especially after Jesus had not been given anything to drink. He had already been hurt really bad, and he couldn't carry the cross all the way up on his own. So one of the soldiers got a man out of the crowd and brought him in, and he said, you need to help him. He can't carry it all the way up there. So this man took Jesus's cross for him and helped him carry it the rest of the way. So when they got to the top of the mountain, the soldiers nailed Jesus to the cross and lifted him up. And it was Jesus in the middle, and there were two men on either side of him. Those men had also, they were thieves. They had stolen, and they had not made very good decisions, and so they were up on their cross just like Jesus was. So there were three men, and there was the one on this side of Jesus said, if you're the Messiah, if you're this, the Son of God, save yourself, save us, do something. And Jesus knew that's not what he could, he couldn't do that. I mean, he could very well, he could call every angel there was to come and take him off that cross. But he knew that he needed to do that. He needed to save the people, right? So he's hung there, and then the other man on the other side said, you really are the Messiah. Please remember me. And Jesus told him, he said, you will be with me. So Jesus was up there on the cross, and he was looking out on the crowd of people, and he looked down and he saw his mother, and then he saw his friend John, and he told John to take care of his mother, and he promised to do that. And so he took care of his mom, and he was looking out on the crowd, and all he could say was, God, forgive these people that are being so mean to me, because they don't understand. They don't know what they're doing. So with one final breath, Jesus said, it's finished. And he died. And he did that knowing that he was saving the world from sin. And so they took him down from the cross, and they went and they buried him in the tomb, and they rolled this big stone over it that was huge and super heavy. It took many men to roll that stone in front of the door of the tomb. And then it was heavily guarded because they wanted to make sure that nobody touched Jesus. They wanted to make sure that there was no way anybody was getting in there, and nobody was coming out either. So they had a lot of guards and this big heavy stone in front of it. And the next morning, Mary Magdalene, who followed Jesus during the years and believed in him and who he was, she and another Mary went to the tomb, bringing spices and certain things that they needed to take care of Jesus's body. And so they went to the tomb, and the stone had been rolled away. What? And the guards, they couldn't believe it either. They didn't know what happened. There was no way that stone could have been moved. It was insane. They couldn't believe it. So Mary Magdalene didn't understand what was going on, and so she went inside and she saw that Jesus was gone. He wasn't there. So she came back out, and she looks up, and there's an angel there. And he says, "Who are you looking for?" And she says, "My Jesus is gone." And the angel says, "Right, you're not going to find him here. He's gone." So she and the other Mary ran to tell the other disciples, Jesus is not in his tomb. So a couple of them came back to the tomb with them. And surely enough, he was gone. Where did he go? They couldn't understand. So later, Mary Magdalene actually came back to the tomb on her own. And she was so sad because she thought somebody had taken Jesus's body. And she was actually really sad. She didn't understand what had happened. So she was at the tomb and she was crying. And this man came up to her and he said, "Why are you crying?" And Mary thought that this man was a gardener. And she said to him, "My Jesus is gone. If you've taken his body somewhere, will you please tell me?" And the man said, "Mary." And Mary went, "Oh." Then she realized that was the voice of Jesus. That was the voice of her Savior. So she looked up, and sure enough, it was him. And she couldn't believe it. "Oh my goodness, you're here. And he said, "Yes, I'm here. Go and tell the others." So Mary ran back and she told the disciples, "I've seen him. I've seen Jesus. He's alive. I've seen him. He's here." And they couldn't believe it either. And they were all so excited. So the tomb was empty and Jesus was alive. And that's what Easter Sunday is all about. So Good Friday, Jesus had died on the cross and he had gone through all this pain. But Sunday morning came and he was alive and he was no longer in the tomb where they had buried him. So our lesson actually doesn't end there, but it will for this week because that's what Easter is about. And we will continue of what happened next week. It's going to be a lot of fun. And I can't wait to tell you guys about that also. So we will see you next week. Happy Easter. Bye.